Chapter 23. They continued to drag me down the hall, and for several minutes I was too devastated to notice or care where they were taking me. We rode the elevator up, and then they hurried me out and into the B-deck hall. 20 hours. That's until he goes insane. After that, if he's not taken care of in another 24, he'll die. I jerked up as I remembered August's words. We still had time to save him. Competing emotions tore at me. My heart sank like lead as I thought of him never being sane again, and yet at the thought that his life might be saved, adrenaline surged through my veins. Where were they taking me? What were they going to do with me? Would they hide me somewhere else so Commander Howitz couldn't get to me again? As we got closer and closer to the end of the hall, the side of the ship, I understood. They were taking me to their speeder. But how could they use it without the commander's clearance? Unless they knew how I'd gotten in his room. The same method would probably work on the speeder. Instinctively, I jerked my hands behind my back. They couldn't know. How could they? Gilders and Ralston were the only other people who knew what had happened, and neither of them would tell. But something told me that the men who could stop security cameras and get through locked doors with a little metal device could figure out anything they wanted. My idea was confirmed as the large airlock doors at the end of the hall came into view. I wasn't going to go with them. I had to save the doctor, somehow. Letting my heart beat twice, I gave my arm a wrench, trying to pry it from Pete's grasp. If he was surprised, he didn't show a sign of it. His hold didn't loosen, and he continued jogging towards the airlock. "No!" I screamed. I tried to plant my feet on the floor, but they slid easily. As we passed the last quarters door, I tried to grab onto it, but we were too far away. He pulled me through the huge doorway, and I grabbed onto the edge of it with my free hand, clamping my fingers as tightly as I could manage. I would not go. He kept tugging on me for a moment, and a wave of pain shot over my shoulder. My knuckles cracked painfully, and my fingers slid slowly over the edge, but I didn't give up. "Help!" I screamed. "Help!" Sigmund clapped a hand over my mouth and pulled my hand forcibly from the door. I saw the access opening into a small, moored craft. Together, they dragged me towards the access panel. I struggled, tried to scream, but the short man's hand effectively blocked any sound. Pete used his free hand to activate the panel. "Ready for clearance scan," came the computerized voice. I fought harder than ever. Pete pulled my hand close to the panel, but adrenaline seemed to give me superhuman strength, and I pulled back, pressing my boots harder into the smooth metal floor. Sigmund let go of my arm and gave me a push in the back. I stumbled forward and felt my hand pressed to the warm surface of the scanner. But he had also let go of my mouth, and I screamed again. I heard a sound like something bouncing twice on metal, and then arms encircled Pete's neck from the back, and he was yanked away. The big man let go of my hand to try to disengage the newcomer's arms, and I jumped away from the panel. In a second, Sigmund had grabbed both of my wrists and had started forcing me towards the scanner again, but I kicked him in the shin, and he grunted and let go long enough for me to duck down out of reach of his grasping arms and dash for the back of the room. Then I looked back towards the struggle. August! August, his face paler than ever, fought both men, but he was losing the battle. Even if he were strong and completely healthy, he would have been no match for the two men, or even Pete alone. I clapped my hands over my mouth as Sigmund grabbed his left arm and twisted it behind him, causing August to let out a scream. "Sometimes you have to take risks, August." The scream woke me up. He wasn't fighting them to win. He was fighting them to give me a chance to get away. I knew what I'd have to do. Without waiting another second, I tore my gaze away from the struggle and ran out of the airlock and down the corridor. I didn't look or listen to see if they'd noticed that I had left. I just ran, finally reaching the elevator. It opened, ready for me, and I jumped in. For a split second, I hesitated, then followed my instincts and yelled, "A-deck!" The elevator seemed to rush faster than usual, and yet at the same time it seemed to take longer. I gripped the rail that ran along the wall, feeling the pain still throbbing in my knuckles. Finally, the elevator came to a crisp stop, and I was out almost before the door opened. From there, it was only a few leaps to the bridge doors, which slid open unasked when I reached them. I took in the room at a single glance. There he was, standing beside the captain's chair, face furrowed in stony frustration. "Commander Howitz," I yelled, "they have August!" Silence reigned. He turned slowly to look at me, anger shooting from his face. "How did you—" "Never mind that," I cried, jumping forward. "Pete and Sigmund, they have August in the airlock. They're hurting—" Before I could say another word, he was out of the command pit and at the door. "Martin, keep an eye on things," he called. "You, come with me." He looked at me as he said "you," and I hastened to follow. I had only a second in which to decide whether or not to obey, and it was enough. I had to look after August if he was hurt, and if I didn't come, I felt sure that the commander would only force me. Not a word was said as we rode the elevator back down to C deck and rushed through the halls. He didn't question me, he only ran. I panted as I tried to keep up with him, using 2 steps to his 1. "DNA, Howitz, Erasmus, Commander, security cleared," the computer voice ran out as we approached the airlock. The commander bounded the last few meters to the entrance, and I heard shouts of surprise. Breathing hard, I reached the opening at last and looked in. The commander thumped a large fist on Pete's head, then twisted his arm behind his back and yanked his blaster from its holster at his belt. Tossing the blaster into the corner, he released the man and drew his own weapon in a single fluid movement, then stepped back and surveyed the 2 men. Sigmund hadn't had time to draw his own and made no move to do so now. August lay senseless on the floor, blood steadily trickling from a gash in his forehead. I cried out and started to dash to his side, but the commander's voice stopped me. "Just a moment, Genevieve. Take Mr. Sigmund's blaster from his belt." I tried to swallow, but a nervous lump prevented it. I walked the 2 steps to the odd little man's side and pulled his blaster from his belt, never meeting his eyes. Then I stepped back. "Point it at them," he ordered. I did so, settling my trembling finger on the trigger. "Now," he said it calmly, his gravelly voice drawing the syllable out uncomfortably. "Over to that corner, away from the entrance." Pete's eyes were angry, but Sigmund's high ones didn't change. They shuffled a few meters to their left. "Keep them covered, Andy." Lowering his weapon, he walked to the panel and began to work it. Pete's eyes dared me to fire if he moved, and I stared back with all the sternness I could muster. "I believe you've broken our deal, gentlemen," the commander said coolly, continuing his work for a moment. Then the computer announced, "Mooring locked." The commander turned around. "You're the one who broke it," Pete exploded. "Locking the girl away? That wasn't part of—" "She was interfering. What made you think that I wouldn't follow through with our agreement?" They seemed to have no answer to this. Sigmund asked coldly, "Just what is your plan now, Sanderson?" As a reply, the commander pushed a button on his wristcom and spoke into it. "2 armed officers to port peripheral 1 at once." "Yes, sir," a voice answered. "Arresting us?" asked Sigmund coldly. "Yes. I can no longer trust you." "Don't play games," Sigmund scoffed. "You never trusted us." "That doesn't really matter now, does it? On second thought, you cause more trouble than I care for. Perhaps I should just dispense with you." "Commander!" I cried. "Unless you'd like to show your worth by telling me the clearance code for the piloting of your ship." So my guess earlier had been right. Neither could take me before because neither could leave without clearance from the other. If he could get the code from them, there'd be nothing stopping him from just taking me and leaving right now. I bit my lip. Pete looked haughty. "Nice try, Sanderson." Even as he spoke, I understood. He wouldn't kill them. If he did, he'd never be able to use the speeder. 2 uniformed crewmen appeared with drawn blasters in the doorway. Commander Howitz looked at them and cocked his head towards his co-conspirators. "Take them to the brig, lowest level." They didn't argue. They were both too smart for that. The crewmen shifted around behind them and pointed their blasters at their backs at point-blank range. "You heard the commander?" Not even waiting for them to make it out the door, the commander turned to me, resheathing his blaster. "How is he?" "August." I dropped the blaster I was holding and knelt by his side. The blood had already slowed, but he was still pale and his breathing was shallow. "He's in the early stages of shock," I announced, feeling his wrist. "We'd better get him to sickbay." Without a word, he hoisted August up in his powerful, muscular arms and started down the hall.